Recording. Hello, and welcome into the first ever Stomp the Bus show, a show about ASU football. My name is Mark Harris, and I'm joined by my co-host.
What's up, guys? I'm Brock Suggs. I'm so excited to be here. I'm just very grateful for Mark giving me the opportunity to do this. I'm a three-time ASU grad. I've been in college since I was 16. I'm working on my fourth bachelor's right now. All at ASU. Go Devils.
Is it a bachelor's in lying, Mr. Suggs? Or should I call you Mr. Dodgson?
Whatever you want to call me. I have a bunch of names, aliases, if you will. ASU stopped letting me pursue bachelor's because it wasn't fair to the other kids. But I got through on an alias, so it's all good. You can call me Colton too. That's totally fine.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm glad you could get through the extremely high academic rigors of ASU. It's pretty tough. You know what else is tough for ASU? Oh, I'm sorry, what?
No, I said everybody should be proud, but you were saying, Mark, go ahead.
Right. Anyway, my failed segue there is, you know what else is tough for ASU? Everything, because USC and UCLA threw the chainsaw into the bathtub last week when they announced that they were moving to the Big Ten. That's right. The conference in the Midwest is taking LA schools. And while there's a ton of big picture questions about the state of college football, what's going to happen with the Pac-12, this is an ASU football podcast. And look, I'll be honest, when I first heard about this news, Colton, my first thought was, one, like, this is bad. Like, this is obviously very bad for college football. But my second thought was, what's going to happen? Like, how does this affect ASU football? You know, are we going to the Big 12? Are we going to the Big 10? That's not going to happen. But SEC, are we going to join the ACC?
I was kind of hoping we'd go to the Mountain West so we could finish top three in a conference. That was my hope.
Are you sure we'd finish top three in the Mountain West?
I honestly was going to say win a conference, and then I had to be a little more realistic with my expectations for this team upon giving my projection. But at first glance, when you first hear the news, you're sort of thinking like, oh, okay, you don't have to see Lincoln Riley anymore. That'll be nice. Eagles legend Chip Kelly will no longer be a factor. Sometimes he can, not that UCLA is very dangerous typically, but it's LA. Maybe they steal a recruiting class in a couple of years, but either way, you don't have to deal with either of those guys anymore. But then I thought about it a little deeper, and it's not going to matter because ASU is going to lose to a Washington State or a Utah or a BYU the second there's any implications anyway, regardless of who is in their conference. So it was kind of a double-edged sword for me, where it's like, oh, maybe this makes the road a little easier for ASU. Obviously, they get rid of divisions, so it's not right. You still have to contend with Oregon and Washington for whatever reason. It seems like they're only good every 3 or 4 years, whatever it is. But still, you have to contend with those North schools now because there's no divisions. But that was my first thought, was maybe it makes the road a little easier. But ASU is never going to allow the road to be easier for themselves. So that's kind of what I was thinking when those were my thoughts were twofold. Let's say there's a big word for you, twofold.
Do you learn that at the Cronkite School? Big words.
That's where I got my second bachelor's.
There you go.
Yeah.
So I agree with you that it's funny. You're Mountain West Point. Like, we saw what happened the last time ASU played San Diego State. So,
wait, BYU's in the Big 12 now, right?
So BYU right as of today is in independent, but they're going to join the Big 12.
Oh, and so ASU might have to contend with BYU as a conference foe now.
Yeah. So the thing is, so look, USC and UCLA leaving the Pac-12, like, it's obviously bad for ASU because this affects the Pac-12's possibility of having a TV rights deal that can even kind of contend with the Big 12, not the Big 12, the Big 10 and the SEC. But now it's like now everyone's scrambling. And so there's all sorts of realignment rumors going around. When I first saw that ASU, I'm sorry, not ASU, that the two LA schools were leaving to the Big Ten, my first reaction in terms of where they're going to go is to the Big 12. It just kind of makes sense geographically. There's been so many reports about the four corner schools, ASU, U of A, Colorado, and Utah, joining the Big 12. And from a competitive standpoint, like I would like that. Like you still get to keep some rivalries too. Like obviously the Territorial Cup you would keep, and then ASU and Utah has kind of become like a rivalry over the past 10 years. It's not the same type of rivalry as the Territorial Cup, but so I was like, okay, like ASU is not going to go to the Big Ten. They're not going to the SEC. Maybe conference realignment moves, down the road, 10, 15 years from now, maybe that happens, but they weren't going to either of those two schools. And like Oregon and Washington wanted to go to the Big Ten, and right now they can't get in. The Big Ten is basically just waiting on Notre Dame before they make a next step. And so
it took me a second to remember what the four corners were. So I'm glad you elaborated on what those schools were. I was sitting here racking my brain.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, isn't there like 20 schools? After the rumor came out about Colorado, U of A, or U Arizona, ASU, and Utah.
Right.
And then we just touched on BYU and all of the other schools that were joining the Big 12 in the wake of Oklahoma and Texas departing for the SEC. Isn't there like 20 schools rumored to be joining this conference at this point? I saw the article that was talking about super conferences, but I don't think we've seen another conference sort of expand to try to keep up with the SEC and now the Big Ten with USC and UCLA joining them. So I'm just confused. I have no idea what's going on. And quite frankly, I if this leads to an 8-team playoff field, do whatever you have to do, because that's the end game. That's what we should be aiming for. Not that ASU will ever come close to sniffing it, but at least there's a little bit of hope by week 6, maybe something like that. It's like, oh wow, there's a scenario. We're still crunching numbers. So it's just really confusing right now. But that's my wish list. Maybe expand the college football playoff to 8 and put close a media deal where we can actually watch this team more than once a year.
Right.
Because nobody has the Pac-12 network. But that's my 2 cents.
Right. Well, you're definitely right about this being extremely confusing. Like there's reports ASU to the Big 12. There's reports of the Pac-12 and the ACC kind of merging in some way, which we'll get to later on. But so you mentioned super conferences, and right now it's the Big Ten and the SEC are the super conferences. I think that once these realignment moves are finalized and Texas and OU join the SEC and the LA schools join the Big Ten, both of those schools will competitively, like the SEC is obviously better and the Big Ten is a clear second choice in terms of just on the field competitiveness, but they'll make so much more money. Like the Big Ten, they're probably going to sign $1 billion per year TV rights deal with Fox per year. So that means the schools are going to make like $100 million per year. And the SEC, it's probably not, it might not be that quite as much, but it'll still be a lot. And it'll both be like, no matter like if ASU, U of A, Colorado, Utah, and then there's also rumors of UW and Oregon even joining the Big 12. That would be like a clear number 3 conference, but they'll still be making like I don't know, let's just say like $45 million a year in TV revenue, which is obviously a lot, but that's still puts you so far behind the big boys, you know?
Right. Imagine what ASU could do with $100,000.
100 million.
100 million, excuse me, of money that you could invest to things like NIL, excuse me.
Yeah.
I think they would just sit on the money and develop players.
That's the Vealed shot.
I think that's what would happen is we're going to develop players like we've done so well
Yeah.
for so long. Now
Well,
that
Colton, I didn't
under
know that you knew, but ASU is the only school that actually focuses on developing players for the NFL. That's our niche. No other school even cares about that. Oh gosh, I don't even want to get into that
I
right now because
I just wish I got the opportunity to play for development instead of a $200,000 NIL deal.
yeah.
That's the dream opportunity, to be promised development instead of hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's what every 18-year-old looks for.
I mean, it's not, and plus, I mean, there's almost no chance you'll have a career-ending injury in football. I mean, come
Oh
on,
no,
that never
no,
happens.
you don't need money at 18. What are you going to spend it
No,
on?
no.
Get a
But
free
anyway,
education.
yeah. Well, we can finish that tangent on another day because
I
there's
did
plenty of
my
meat,
homework, Mark.
there's plenty of meat on the bone when it comes to ASU and its lack of NIL prioritization. But what I want to get into is, and we've touched on this a little bit, is what's next for ASU when it comes to conference realignment. And so we touched on the Big 12. Let's kind of dive into that a little more. The original reporting was the 12 teams that the Big 12 is going to have. So let's see if I can get that off the top of my head. You have the two Kansas schools, Texas Tech, Houston, Baylor, TCU, Oklahoma State,
Is
Iowa
BYU
State.
one?
What?
Are you talking about the Big 12 or the Big
Yeah.
10?
Big 12.
Okay, BYU is one, right?
Yeah, BYU. And then
Okay.
they're adding West Virginia they already have, and then they're also adding Cincinnati and
Right.
UCF.
Okay.
So it's kind of a mishmash of like the remaining Big 12 teams and then the best group of 5 teams that also had like a TV monetary value that they could bring into the conference of some kind. That's why Boise State hasn't been added, because they don't have enough like TV households and stuff, even though they've, and one of this, but anyway, so one of the sad things about this whole realignment thing is it's not really so much about how good you are on the field. I mean, it kind of is, but not really, because if 2 Pac-12 schools were leaving, then Oregon would have been a part of it instead of UCLA. But UCLA, I feel like they just kind of hopped on just because USC needed a partner. So
Yeah, it's going to be like when, let's say, a hypothetical scenario for you, Mark. A set of brothers. One is a senior that is a little washed up, but had some glory days. Made varsity as a sophomore for football. Had a little run, but is still coasting off of that social equity, if you will, that they've established.
I can
And
relate.
they have a little brother, right? I know you have a little brother. They have a
I
little
do.
brother. The
Shout out
little
Timmy.
brother is a freshman, and this hypothetical senior is inviting him to a party, and all of the other seniors are really excited. And then they give him a few beers, and they ask him if he wants to go bodies, and then they all just beat him up and they laugh. The senior is USC, and the freshman is UCLA. I don't think UCLA is going to win more than 4 games in the Big Ten. It is going to be brutal.
More than 4.
UCLA in the Big Ten is going to be – it's going to be a slugfest.
Yeah.
The Penn States, the Wisconsins, all of the other hypothetical seniors from my scenario who are anxiously awaiting this freshman to show up are very excited to get to – even the Minnesotas of the world are excited to play UCLA. It's that Southern California thing, man. They got to do it together, right? If one's going, the other one has to go.
Right.
But it would be unique to see USC and Oregon play in the Rose Bowl that isn't a national championship, because that's a scenario now.
You mean USC and like Ohio State?
Well, no, because USC is going to be in the Big Ten.
Right. Anyway.
So that's what I'm saying. So if like USC wins the Big Ten or UCLA wins the Big Ten, play.
Right. Okay, I see.
It'll be really really unique there to get those for one of the New Year's 5 bowls.
Right.
But it's crazy times, man. But UCLA is not gonna. There's not gonna be any favors for UCLA in the Big Ten.
No.
I think that's gonna be brutal.
Well, UCLA had like Oh, sorry.
No,
UCLA
no,
had
no, go
like
ahead.
$100 million, or has $100 million like athletic budgets deficit. And so they'll be able to cover that up now that they're in the Big Ten.
Yeah, the money part is another wrinkle that's like,
Well, that's why they did it. That's the only reason why.
yeah, but like some guys like us that could never imagine that amount of money. Like that part you don't even really think about. You're more thinking about what does this mean competitively? That's
Right.
what you're trying to just like crunch in your head while all of this is going down. But you realize it does not matter because these schools are making so much money that they don't care if they have to fire Chip Kelly next year. Like
Oh, right. Yeah.
it just doesn't, whatever his buyout would be. I don't know if he got an extension, but whatever. That's neither here nor there. The money wrinkle to this is just so unique, and it adds a completely different layer that I think like guys like you and I aren't even thinking about. I just want to finally have like, I miss college football Saturdays, but I want to have a college football season where it's like there's any real implication for a team that I'm actually invested in.
Right.
And I don't know when we'll ever get that.
Well, that would for ASU, it should have been last year, right? I mean, even if they
Utah
went
had the season that ASU should have had.
yeah,
100%.
they did. They really did. I mean, and even if ASU had just because they went 8-4 last year, but I don't know if they led the country in the NCAA or the FBS in penalties.
They
If
were
they
top
didn't lead
30
it,
if they didn't.
if they didn't lead it, they were damn close. I haven't checked it, but they had just ridiculous amounts of just comical penalties throughout the year. And that landed them at 8-4, and when they probably could have gone 10-2. And even if that might not have won the conference, but at least you like have a 10-win season, And as ASU fans, you can't scoff at a 10-2 season if you're an ASU fan. So anyway, hopefully
if you're talking about a 10-2 season, I'm assuming you mean wins over BYU and Utah, right? Because those were the two winnable games.
Well, I disagree. I think the Wazoo and Oregon State games are the ones that you should have won.
Absolutely.
No matter what. Like
Utah, they had a 21 point lead at half, right?
they were up. I think they're up 21-7.
Okay, 14-point lead at half. You don't squander something like that, right? BYU, they're returning a pick six. Merlin Robinson is returning a pick six to take the lead and has the ball punched out of his arms. Those are two games that it's not like, oh, on paper you should have won. You should have won. Like,
right.
You're making plays to win those games.
Right.
And you still lose those games for whatever reason. If they win those two games, taking Wazoo and Oregon State out of the equation, you're still 10-2 with a win over Utah.
Right.
You're probably playing for a Pac-12 championship if you're not a top 3 penalized team in the country.
Right.
And you're not giving up a fumble to BYU on I think it was a pick six or a fumble recovery.
Well, it could have been a pick six, but
en route to a pick six is what I mean, or a defensive touchdown, whatever it may be. It's those errors,
the mental errors,
and those two games, in my mind, those two plays or those two scenarios are the difference between Utah and ASU.
Yeah,
right. It's just infuriating, especially last season, because I've been saying that for months. Utah had the season that ASU should have had. We should have gotten embarrassed in the Rose Bowl. That was our right to do that, not theirs.
Hey, they lost close in the Rose Bowl. Okay, there's a big difference, but
they took a big lead, right?
I think they did, but anyway.
Maybe it was back and forth. I don't remember. I tune it out after December every year.
Well, hopefully, if ASU does go to the Big 12, they do have some 10-2 seasons. Let's just kind of talk out. Let's just say ASU does go to the Big 12. I know that that's not guaranteed to happen. I mean, who the bleep knows what's going to happen, but let's just kind of game that out. So the thing with the Big 12, and let's just say it's the 4 schools that go, because there's rumors of UW and Oregon going, but if UW and Oregon get the invite to the Big 10, that's where they're going. Like, I think everyone should know that. And they're kind of on the bubble right now. But the thing with ASU in the Big 12 is that there's no like Godzilla type program in there, like there's not a USC that has the potential to win natties. There's not an Oregon, or in the just the 4-team scenario. There's likely not going to be an Oregon in there that is like a pseudo blue blood program. I mean, they've been to 2 national championship games. So if you've been there, like that's still really impressive. Like the best programs right now, I'd say Utah would be one, Oklahoma State, and then Baylor, and Cincinnati too, since they made the playoff. Like all of those programs are obviously, like right now, today on July 7th, 2022, they are better football programs than ASU. But it's not like they're insurmountable for ASU to pass if things at ASU like get on the right track. You know what I'm saying? So I think from that perspective, like that's what kind of intrigues me about going to the Big 12. And you'll have some interesting road destinations. You would still have Salt Lake City, Boulder, Tucson, and then you would add Houston, Fort Worth, Cincinnati. It's kind of weird, but
it's all kind of weird right now, and it's kind of hard to speak on it because I feel like with the rumored teams going to the Big 12, until anything is solidified, you're looking at like with this hypothetical Pac-12 exodus to the Big 12, you're looking at like 20 teams joining this conference. That's like
it would be 16.
It would be 16. Okay, right. Still with 16 and every conference moving away from divisions, you're looking at like how often between the conference schedule and the non-conference schedule, how often are you playing the teams on a year-to-year basis? Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. So
like how do you cultivate those rivalries? One, when you have no history with the teams that you're joining, and there's very limited opportunity to schedule them on a consistent basis.
Right. Well, that's a good question. So let's just, in the scenario where it's the 16 teams in the Big 12, and even the 18 option with Oregon and Washington. I saw something on Twitter of if it's 18 teams, if Oregon and Washington come along with the 4 corner schools, then it would be ASU in the same 6-team division with U of A, Oregon, Washington, Utah, and then BYU. So that would be.
So they are talking about doing divisions?
Yeah. Well, but it's just
in this hypothetical random scenario that we're throwing out. Right. Okay.
So that would that's the thing with ASU going to the Big 12 is you actually would keep a lot of rivalries because you stay with U of A. Like, I feel like no matter what happens with any sort of realignment, ASU and U of A are going together because neither of their ASU's brand, like ASU has a better football brand than U of A. I don't think that's really arguable, but it's not like it's like it's like U of A's here. It's not like ASU's like way up here. It's like ASU's like here, like
if you talk to any ASU fan, that is the only game they care about every year, which is absolutely ridiculous and needs to stop being the standard. There is nothing, and I don't want to throw the spice out in our first episode here, but there is nothing more infuriating than how excited people get for this meaningless game every year.
Woo! You're stirring it up.
It is 2 underwhelming teams that should do way more than they're currently doing.
That's true.
And these fans who are distraught and deserve so much better, actually trying to hype themselves up for something that they think matters in their corner of the world, while the rest of the Big 10 and the Big 12 and the SEC are contending for playoff spots. We get our territorial cup. It has to stop being the standard. ASU, U of A, rivalry week, it's important. It's college sports, obviously. But until these 2 programs are actually where they should be, these fan bases need to stop treating this game like it's the end-all, be-all. It is the most infuriating thing when this ASU team is 7-4 and U of A is 2-10 or 2-9, whatever it is. Right? And you're going into this game and it's like, this season is a success if you win this game. It's not. It's a failure like the last 5 years have been. So let's just stop treating this game like it means anything until you're beating a team that actually is worthy of beating.
Right. I don't fully agree with you on that, but that's fine. But I do get your overall point of the game will have a lot more luster if the two teams are just better, like if ASU comes into it with like a 9-2 record and U of A is, let's just say U of A is like 5-6 and fighting for a bowl game. Like
Even
that's
if
a
U
much
of
more
A
entertaining game.
Yeah, even if there's a spoiler scenario, like even
Right.
if I'm not going to go as far to say like bowl eligibility. Bowl eligibility, you have to win 6 games to get to a bowl. That is, you get to be average to go play in the bad boy mowers bowl. Like I don't care about that. I'm talking like actual spoiler. Like if you beat
Right.
U of A, and there's a scenario where you could win the South, whereas ASU could lose the game and U of A was the spoiler. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
Something like that.
Yeah. Well, that was the scenario of freshman year, right? In the background you have of the Oregon State game that led to a lot of hangovers.
That's what I'm saying.
It's
2022. We're going into the
know.
2022 season. That was 8 years ago.
Yeah.
It took me 4 bachelors to learn math. That was 8 years ago.
I know.
And that was the last time. Herm Edwards' first year, there was that Oregon game where there was actual implications. But off the top of my head, recording this, those are the last 2 times I can remember any actual implications on any sort of ASU season. But the
Utah game last year,
right?
but we all know
Utah
how that went.
as well, but we know how that went.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So anyway, but just in terms of it's, I mean, we look, if you're watching the show, if you're an ASU fan, state of the football program and the issues facing it, like there's just not like a lot of good news. And so that's why, like, as an ASU fan, like, that's why I don't know. I feel like going to the Big 12, I feel like it's just a good, like, it fits, like you're not really that far from, like, you're not that far from Texas Tech. You're not that far from Dallas. I mean, yeah, you're far from UCF and Cincinnati, but you'll probably play those teams like you'll probably go on the road for those teams like once every 3 years or something like that. Or like you'll go like super out east like one time a year,
Right.
So,
and I think the only benefit with the Pac-12, because essentially what this would be is the Big 12 and the Big 10 absorbing I don't even know what to call them, because I struggle to call ASU and U of A like the crown jewels of the Pac-12.
Well, no, the crown jewels right now are Oregon and Washington.
Right.
Yeah.
Would Oregon and Washington in this Big 12 scenario, would they be absorbed by the Big 12? Or
that's a good question.
Yeah.
So just by like following this stuff on Twitter over the past week, when the 2 LA schools left, Oregon and Washington applied for the Big 10. I mean, ASU might have applied too, but whatever. They both applied to the Big 10, but the Big 10 is kind of waiting on what Notre Dame is going to do, because adding Notre Dame to the Big 10 would be an enormous coup. Like, that would be incredible for them. So UW and Oregon are kind of in a holding pattern right now. But while they're in the holding pattern, I've seen some reports that those 2 schools kind of want to keep the league together. And then there's all this talk of like partnering with the ACC and having like a championship game in Vegas. And like, I'm not like totally opposed to that, but it just seems so convoluted and just so many moving parts. And who's to say that Clemson and Florida State and Miami and North Carolina don't bolt for the SEC 2 weeks from now, So
right.
I'm skeptical of that one. But I think ASU and the rest of the Pac-12 schools are kind of just waiting to see what happens next with the Pac-12 before they actually like make a decision, because there's no point in like rushing this and making some hasty decision and then it's a terrible decision long term, so that's why earlier this week, George Kliavkoff, the Pac-12 commissioner, they released a statement that the Pac-12 is opened its window with ESPN and Fox to negotiate TV rights and stuff like that. So I think what it is while the Pac-12 is negotiating its rights, and that's why it's talking with the ACC about partnering and like putting Pac-12 games on the ACC network that's more nationwide as opposed to the Pac-12 network, which obviously is not. And I think that the Pac-12 negotiating with TV networks and then also these talks of the ACC and the Pac-12 kind of joining-ish, I think they're kind of related. But and in terms of ASU, I think it's just going to come down to whichever conference can give you the best TV payout per year, you know? And if it's like, it's hard to just.
When do the current rights expire?
For the Pac-12?
You're right.
It was in 2024, but I mean, now that they're renegotiating, who knows, you know? And we're not journalists. We're not TV experts. Like,
well, Mark is.
We're just fans. So
Mark's a journalist.
I'm a former journalist.
I used to read him every day.
Wow.
That's what brought us here.
Yeah.
I think with realignment and everything that's going on with these conferences, anything that brings us closer to an 8-team field for the playoff is what gets my vote. Even if ASU never sniffs the playoff, which is the most likely scenario, at least you're getting a little parity. At least it's a little compelling.
Right.
The same 6 teams vying for 4 spots every year. It has to change.
Right.
Even if Alabama still wins this playoff every year, at least other teams got to go and they got to feel that excitement. Fan bases were fired up, all of that sort of thing. You still give the Power 4. I don't know what they're going to be now.
Well, it's the Power 2, and then it's going to be the Power 2, and then the next 2, right? So
and then I mean, even the not the AC, the AAC. I always get those mixed up, but the AAC is adding teams too. They lost a couple, but they're adding like the James Madisons, and you know that conference is like kind of been keeping strides a little bit. Obviously, sent Cincinnati to the playoff last year, but
yeah,
I just don't even know what's going on. And so I kind of have tunnel vision for whatever is going to get these voters to finally agree on expanding the field to 8, which what incentive does the SEC have to do that? They send half of the field every year anyway.
Yeah. So that's kind of, so the thing with the playoff, I feel like the playoff isn't going to be decided until like all of these moves are made, you know, all the dust settles, and then we'll get to the playoffs.
Right.
So,
but what sucks about that too is like all of this stuff that's happening, it's not even going to take effect until 2 to 3 years from now.
Right.
If the playoff is eventually expanded to 8 teams, we're going to be 30 by the time we see 8 teams in the playoff. It's like,
oh, dude,
it's just brutal to be like, getting 4 teams is good. I like that. It's like, finally, there's actual, it's not just like guys get to vote on who gets to go to the national championship, but it has to progress a little further. We're on the right track. Maybe, I don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
But I don't know. That's what I hope to see, I guess.
Yeah, well, the big problem with college sports is that literally every entity looks out for themselves first, which I understand. But if whatever, like 30 years ago, there was just a system, not the NCAA, like a college football like league that had a commissioner and all this other structure that professional sports leagues have,
right,
in college football, but instead it's these 5 fiefdoms, you know, controlling their own stuff. And right now the Big Ten and the SEC are the 2 most powerful, and they're just gobbling up all the big brands.
Right, because what is the product that they need to protect? Like, what is the product where they need to think about the greater good?
No, they don't.
Yeah, their greater good is their conference.
And
they're
the money they
sending
make
teams to the playoff every year. It doesn't matter to them. Everybody outside looking in. I mean, Clemson is really the only other team that's not in that Big Ten SEC bubble. I mean, occasionally a Washington or an Oregon gets close, but there's no product that all 5 of these conferences, and then the smaller conferences, whatever it is, there's no product that the Power 5 needs to protect. Every product is what their own individual conferences are producing. And for the SEC and the Big Ten, and to some extent the Big 12 and the ACC, they're already producing the product that they need to. What sort of reform do they need to look at?
Yeah, well, I'll push back a little bit on especially the the Big 12 is very similar. I mean, the Big 12 lost its two biggest programs last year.
Right.
So they're
Now,
very
I guess
similar.
that's a good point because the Big
Similar
12
both
looks a
in the
little
Pac-12.
different now. Those two teams, and I calling Texas one of its biggest programs. I see where you're going with that.
Biggest brands. Emphasis on the word brand, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. Brand is a good way to put it.
Yeah.
But Oklahoma and Texas, the two biggest brands in the Big 12, they're in a similar boat. I mean, the Pac-12 just lost their two biggest brands too.
Right.
Oregon is pretty massive, but
yeah,
the Big 12 and the Pac-12 are in very similar boats here. But I don't know, man. It's just craziness. There's no unified body.
No.
Except for whatever the NCAA is. I don't even know what purpose they serve now in the NIL.
Oh, they're neutered. They're totally neutered.
Yeah, there's nothing they can.
Their service right now is okay. They're neutered when it comes to football. Like they still have the men's and women's tournaments and the baseball tournament, and that's what they should be used for in all reality. Because college football's like people talk about like the two, like there's two revenue sports for college sports. It's college football and men's basketball. It's like, yeah, there's really one because it's like 85% of the money is college football, So it's.
And you get a little boost if you make the men's basketball tournament or whatever it is.
Right. But it's not even, it's like college football drives the bus,
No, absolutely.
And yeah, so it's just, yeah, you're right. And just, it is crazy. And I mean, another thing that's crazy that I can't even believe that this is like an actual scenario that like is being seriously reported by like legitimate like reporters who know their stuff, like John Canzano of not the Oregonian. He has his own website, but he's a huge, Portland media figure who's very connected, and John Bloner of the San Jose Mercury News. These are the two biggest Pac-12 reporters. And John,
I'm a friend of the Pacific Northwest, as you are as well.
Of course.
Yeah.
But they're reporting that like these talks with the Pac-12 and the ACC, like not officially merging, but they'll have like a championship game in Vegas. And the idea behind this is that it'll mutually benefit both conferences because they'll both get paid more, which doesn't make sense to me at all. Right.
Well, that would be something that like a network would have to pay more for.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And here's the thing. ESPN has a fantastic TV deal with the ACC. They're locked in until 2036, which is that's like being locked in a deal starting in 2008 and ending in 2022. Like the world is completely different now than it was then. It'll be completely different in 2036 than it is now. I'll be 41 years old. So
I didn't think about that.
Yeah. So they're locked into a deal like that, and ESPN's not going to pay him more. Right? Like, why would ESPN be like, oh yeah, let's rip up this contract so we can pay you guys more money? Like, that's not how it works,
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know what incentive. I'm not very well versed on the business side. That's not what I got one of my 4 bachelors in.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know what the incentive would be. I don't know how they would incentivize a joint championship game, because it's essentially, in my mind, it's instead of divisions within conferences, you're doing an inter-conference championship.
Yeah.
To try, it benefits the conferences because
right,
whoever wins that game is essentially an auto bid
right
to the playoff field, like
right.
with 4 teams. So I don't know as far as TV deals how that would incentivize, but in terms of the landscape for getting new teams into the playoff, I mean, Clemson might always be there. They kind of had a down year, but I like it from a competitive standpoint. I don't know how it would work business-wise, but all of this is hypothetical. I don't know what is even going to happen.
Right.
But in terms of commenting on that, I think it's a great idea competitively. I don't know how it would work business-wise.
Well, and yeah, it would be interesting, right? Because in this scenario, it would be the Pac-10. So the current schools of the Pac-10. So if you're a Wazoo fan, if you're an Oregon State fan, Cal fan, if you're one of the 5 Stanford fans in existence, this is
Oh,
what you
hey,
want, right?
Stanford.
Because
Stanford has a fan base, man. You can't knock Stanford.
they do.
They care about their team.
They
Best
have
marching band in the country too.
they have dozens and dozens of fans. They make ASU's fan base look like Alabama.
Well, no,
which
the
is
problem with ASU's fan base is 60% of the stadium is set up to be the student section, and
Oh,
all of
yeah,
those
with the
kids
double.
black out before the end of the first quarter and get kicked out of the stadium. So
Right.
it's empty by quarter number 2, because nobody can stand in those sections. It's more of a design flaw than it is. You had to understand what would happen there. So I don't necessarily. It's more of an architectural flaw. They should have seen that. Kind of like when they built a high-rise nursing home on Mill Avenue.
Oh, yeah.
These are
You
the
shut down.
decisions.
Yeah.
But
And
these are the zoning decisions that we're making, that I question, to say the least.
yeah. RIP Shady Park.
Did they close?
Well, it's not closed, but it's like I think they can't play music right now, which I didn't even go there, but like that's a big, like, it's an important place for a lot of people who like went to ASU. But anyway,
I appreciate you shouting those people out, Mark. I'm sure they'll really appreciate it.
I'm sure they'll be listening. Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, the ACC and the Pac-12, like, or Pac-10, we got to call it the Pac-10. There's 2 of the teams left. This
Are they
partnership
going
would,
to rebrand? Because isn't there like 10 teams in the Big 12? Do you
yeah.
think they'll
Well,
still call it the Pac-12?
I don't know. I mean, they call it the Big 10, and now they'll have 16 teams. So it's just,
Yeah, I don't know if
yeah.
they'll even rebrand. But I mean, they
Oh,
rebranded when they added Utah and Colorado, so who knows?
yeah. But anyway, like, this scenario where the Pac League joins with the ACC, this is what you want to hear if you're a Wazoo fan, Cal fan, Stanford fan, Oregon State fan, because those schools have not been mentioned as like, oh, the Big 12 wants Wazoo, the Big 12 is interested in Oregon State. Like, I mean, my dad went to Oregon State. We know Oregon State fans. Like, I know plenty of Wazoo fans. Like, they care. Like, this is awful for them. Like, it's awful for ASU, but it's even more awful for those schools because there's like I know you were joking about the Mountain West earlier, but they have an actual chance of going to the Mountain West. Like, if like this ACC Pac-12 thing Pac-10 thing doesn't work, because I don't see the Pac-10 just standing on its own as 10 schools, and Oregon, Washington are the 2 like flagships. Like, I just don't see that happening because there's so much risk of Oregon and Washington jumping if and when they get a Big 10 invite, you know?
It's so insane to me, and you're right when you say it, but it's so insane to me that USC is considered a flagship. Like, they have been classic underwhelmers for like 20 years, 15, 20 years.
15.
Like, it's just insane that they're like flagship.
Yeah, but they just have so
You're
much
right.
history.
And
They
they
just
have
have so much
not
tradition
only
and history. Like, that's just,
the
unfortunately,
Lincoln
that's just how it
Riley
is, you
factor.
know?
Yeah, the Lincoln Riley factor. They just had the Pittsburgh receiver transfer there too. Just won the Blitnikoff.
Right.
It,
LA
it,
market.
yeah, LA market. It's insane, and that the Big Ten is going to be. I'm just glad that the Lincoln Riley Trojans aren't going to be a team that is on ASU's conference schedule after they're joining after 2023, right?
That's what it's reported. Yeah.
Yeah, whenever it is. I mean, because that team is going to be so good.
Yeah. I mean, it like
They
from
only
an
had
on
to
the
give
field.
them
Yeah.
3 houses and a private jet to get them to come to USC.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Like, from an on the field perspective, it'll definitely, it'll kind of help ASU because it'll be tougher to recruit LA. I mean, right now ASU can't recruit anyone, but that's kind of a separate scenario. In normal ASU times, you obviously try to recruit LA, and they'll still be able to get some kids, but it's going to be tougher because you can't be like, oh, we'll be in LA once a year to play USC or UCLA. But can't do that now because they'll be gone. So it's like the recruiting aspects of this is a whole nother can of worms. And that's part of the reason why I wouldn't hate going to the Big 12, because it's like, oh, we play TCU, we play Baylor, we play Oklahoma
Right.
State, which isn't too
And
far from Dallas.
I
You know?
know ASU had a very, I mean, obviously, Benjamin and guys like that had a really effective sort of pipeline, I guess, with the Texas high schools and things like that. Never getting like huge guys or anything like that, but
Well, Benjamin's the biggest that comes in mind.
yeah, I like different guys like that, and moving to the Big 12 would definitely help that out a bit. And California's under Herm Edwards, one of the states that they have really prioritized,
Right.
especially with Antonio Pierce and everything like that. But like you said, I don't think that's going to be much of an option, because you don't have the pitch of, oh, your whole family can come see you play at least once a year, because more than likely you're playing USC or UCLA every season, right?
Right.
So
you still, it's interesting just talking this out about potentially recruiting LA, because you won't be able to sell, hey, we play in LA each year, but you will be able to sell like, okay, yes, we don't play in LA, but we also we play within like a weekend drive of it.
right, it's a 5-hour, 6-hour drive.
Yeah.
To come see you. So
I don't think like ASU is complete. Like when it comes to recruiting, like right now, I think ASU has like 3 kids committed to them in this class.
I mean, you're not that's why I kind of think the strategy that they're going with right now is beneficial and productive given their situation, is you're not going to have any 18-year-old pledge any level of commitment with the NCAA investigation going
right
until you see what comes of that. So the route that they've kind of taken with the transfer portal, that's what they're going to have to do to even be competitive this year. So honestly, it sounds crazy, especially given the route that they were on recruiting. But I mean, everybody in college football breaks the rules. They just got caught,
Well,
and now in the NIL era, that's going to go out the window. There's not going to be a lot of that going on necessarily, but they were, and what they did, rumored, what they allegedly did has nothing to do with any of that. It was just a very stupid thing to do. And unfortunately, like
brazen.
Yeah, it was extremely dumb. And regardless of how you feel about what they were doing recruiting wise, that has unfortunately all been mitigated. Your best bet to be competitive until these sanctions, and likely after the sanctions are handed down, is to attack the transfer portal and try to mitigate the exodus of people leaving your program by bringing juniors and seniors in who can up their stock for one season, hopefully commit to the draft. You're just attacking free agency essentially. Well, that's all you can do right now.
Yeah, and it's their only option.
Right.
And what's funny is you mentioned the NCAA sanctions. I mean, who even knows if the NCAA will be able to exist in 2 years to give out sanctions? But the thing is, it doesn't even matter, because the cloud of uncertainty around the program has totally screwed them in recruiting. And so, and the other thing is, like you mentioned, how like the way they were cheating. It's as an ASU fan, I'm not mad that they cheated. Like, I want them to continue to cheat. Like, do whatever you need to do to get kids playing for the team, like the best possible kids you can get. Like, as long as it's like morally okay. And by that, I like, don't do like obviously like bad, immoral things. I guess everyone draws that line differently.
I know you have a very strict moral compass, Mark.
Of course. But it's just the way the things that they were doing, like bringing kids on campus during the height of COVID when other coaches weren't doing that. And so
it was kind of like an unspoken thing, is like, we're not going to do this right now. This is something where we've all agreed that we should not do. And they were allegedly at this point the only school that decided that they were going to do that.
Air Force got caught doing it too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I saw that a few months ago, but like, whatever. Yeah, so look, if you're watching this again, if you're an ASU fan, you know the history of what happened and why we are here, where we're at. Kind of as we're wrapping up here, I wanted to we mentioned the two kind of main possibilities for realignment. I'll ask you, what do you want to happen with ASU? And let's kind of keep the playoff out of this because we don't really know what's going to happen. Like, but the playoff is, I feel like that's a few steps down the road.
I'm not. I would never say playoff. I'm not insane.
But I guess what I'm saying is like, what realignment scenario do you want to happen for ASU, and which one do you think will happen for ASU?
Oh man, Mark, that's a tough question because like there's really no answer that I think truly benefits ASU. I think the easy way to answer that would be join the Big 12, compete with those schools. That gives you more credibility. Your wins mean a little more, I guess, given the teams that they're adding.
Yeah.
I mean, the Big 12 is literally a corpse now. It's just a mass exodus off of a sinking ship. It doesn't make sense to stay there. The California, I don't see, based on what we just discussed with the sanctions and everything else with the implications in California, I don't know how that's a very lucrative avenue to just try to stay the course and continue to recruit.
Stay the course in the Pac-10.
Right. Like
Yeah.
stay the course and continue to recruit the Cali Devils or whatever it was extremely hard. I think right now it's just such a tough question to answer because it truly does not matter. Like I don't know when they're going to be competitive. We joked about it in the beginning. They could join the Mountain West and still finish fourth. Like I guess in terms of recruiting, the best avenue to go would just be try to tap into a market that you used to have a really good reputation in under Todd Graham with Texas. I know Todd Graham recruited Texas extremely hard, and got a lot of recruits from that pipeline. So maybe join the Big 12 now that Texas is gone and joined the SEC. Obviously, you still have Texas Tech is still Big 12, right?
Yeah. The current Texas schools in the Big 12 are Texas Tech, Baylor, TCU, and Houston.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot to compete with Texas-wise, but
right.
ASU, what I'm trying to say is ASU still has at least a reputation there. You can still kind of maybe sway a 3 or a 4-star guy here and there.
It's not that far either.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
And it's exactly, you're still going to play in Texas 4 times a year, or it maybe even twice. I didn't mean to say 4. Obviously, you're not going to get all 4 in one conference schedule. But, I mean, there's a likely scenario where you can play in Texas
twice,
something like that. I don't know. So maybe join the Big 12, try to tap into that pipeline. Again, you at least have a reputation there. I think that's the best avenue to being competitive in the long term.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the short term, just try to get your product on more TVs. I want to watch more than 2 games next year when they're playing UCLA or whoever it is. And hit the transfer portal hard. That's what they're doing. They know that that's all they can do in the new college football free agency. But I would like to see the Big 12 move. I don't know what that looks like because I don't know who actually is going to join that conference.
Right.
But I think that provides at least in my mind, the clearest roadmap to being competitive in the long term. But yeah, what do you think?
So I think what I want to happen is for ASU, U of A, Colorado, and Utah to join the Big 12, and then maybe maybe by doing that forces Washington and Oregon's hand, so they also join the Big 12. That's the scenario I want the most, is for the 4 corner schools plus Washington and Oregon to go to the Big 12, because you keep more Western area teams. And you still have the Oklahoma States, the Baylors, the Cincinnatis, all these teams that are just good, solid teams, maybe not elite. I think that's the best case scenario. And I think that being with Oregon and UW in the Big 12, I think that increases the Big 12's annual TV payout value to the schools coming in, including ASU. So that's what I want, because you still kind of have a lot of the best of the rest of the Pac-12, and then you also get going to the Big 12, which has stability now, which is crazy considering last year they were completely unstable. So that's what I want, is for ASU to be one of 6 Pac-12 teams joining the Big 12. What I think,
yeah, regionally, that sounds. I'm just trying to wrap my head around like the Pacific Northwest.
oh, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Regionally, I can't even like process it.
Yeah, well, process LA schools in the Big 10.
Yeah.
The conference goes from Piscataway, New Jersey to Westwood. It's crazy.
Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Well, it's all about the money. But
I know you like money, Mark.
yeah. Well, apparently you don't like it as much as USC and UCLA.
That's why you're widely known as Money Mark. That's why everybody calls you that.
Everybody. That's right. Definitely not just one person on a podcast. Definitely everybody. But anyway, getting back on track here. What I want to happen is for ASU to join the Big 12 as a 6-team block that goes into it, because then you have an 18-team conference. You'll be established as the clear number 3 conference in the country, which is going to mean something. Like someone has to be the third conference behind those two. What I think is going to happen, and I can't even believe I'm saying this because it's so crazy, but I've just seen maybe I'm being led on here, but like I've just seen too much like substantial reporting about the ACC Pac-12 Pac-10 thing. That's what I think is going to happen. There's just been too much talk. I thought that once I saw it would just be one of those reports that kind of pops up in a day. I'm like, oh, remember when that happened? And maybe it might well be that in the long run. But I just have this gut feeling that that's what's actually going to happen. And look, if you get like, if that means like once a year you play like, you go on the road and play like Miami or something, or even like a North Carolina State or like a Pitt, like obviously Clemson and Florida State, when it's, operating in full efficiency, are the 2 like big ones. But having a few, like, I don't even want to call, there would be like kind of conference games with an ACC team. That would be kind of cool. But the ACC Pac-12 thing, and this is so.
That would be more of a partnership, right?
Right.
That wouldn't be, yeah. And I think that's probably the likeliest scenario. I think that's ultimately what ends up happening is the Pac-12 becomes the Pac-10 again. Everybody stays and they work with another conference, like you were saying.
Yeah.
ACC, to try to boost the credibility and the prestige of whatever you do in conference. So I think what you're talking about is probably what ultimately ends up happening.
Yeah. And it's, so you mentioned there's one little twist. And this is just kind of reading. I mentioned John Canzano earlier. He's very connected to the Pac-12 based out of Portland. He mentioned something in one of his articles about the Pac-12. If this ACC Pac-12, I keep saying Pac-12, Pac-10.
Mark,
if
I
this
think people will
happens,
know what you're talking about.
What?
I said, I think people will know what you're talking about.
Yeah. This partnership thing, if this happens, he mentioned that this could be an opportunity for the Pac-12 to actually poach some Big 12 schools. So that would be interesting if you like get Baylor and Oklahoma State and I don't know, BYU to join in. That would definitely make it more interesting. But again, this is all like, who the bleep knows what's going to happen? Like nobody knows. The fact that USC and UCLA kept this quiet, there were no leaks for like a months long period of them negotiating with this behind the scenes. Like nobody knows. And in college sports, everyone's just out for themselves and they'll stab you in the back, no problem. So
yeah, I think
that's where we're at.
I think in episode 2, we should cut down on your bleeps a little bit.
The bleeps?
Yeah. I think one bleep is too much for one show.
Okay. Well,
so I want you to watch your mouth on the next episode.
Well, I'll bleep and try. How's that? Yeah. Well, for the millions of you listening on YouTube and on
Don't sell yourself short, Mark.
billions, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
For the many of you, likely actually dozens of you listening, thank you for tuning in. I'm Mark Harris, and that's Colton Dodgson. We're going to try to
It's broad
give you,
strokes.
yeah, we're going to try to give you fairly regular podcasts about ASU football. And, right now there's a lot going on. Realignment season is here again, and we're just on this roller coaster with all of you. Thank you for tuning in to episode 1 of Stomp the Bus, and go Devils, baby.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
That's right.